Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Another day, another installment in the Russian election soap opera. This one, an unexpected plot twist. Earlier today, Donald Trump Jr. released an email exchange he had last summer with an English publicist named Ron Goldstone. Now, Goldstone had offered Trump a meeting with a Russian lawyer called Natalia Veselnitskaya. Pronounced that twice. He claimed she had incriminating information about Hillary Clinton's dealings with Russia. Now, Don Trump took the bait and met with Veselnitskaya some weeks later, though he complained later that she had nothing interesting to say during the meeting and instead just talked about Russian adoption law. Goldstone, meanwhile, emailed Trump Jr. to claim, without offering any evidence to support it, that the Russian government supported his father, Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Now, Don Trump released all those emails a little before noon today, and within minutes, the Congressional Treason Caucus swung into action to accuse Donald Trump Jr. of betraying his country.
We're now beyond obstruction of justice in terms of what's being investigated. This is moving into perjury, false statements, and even into potentially treason.
So, according to a sitting member of Congress, gossiping with foreigners now qualifies as treason in America, even if no meaningful information is exchanged. You ought to consider that before you allow an exchange student to live in your house. It could be a bigger risk than you think. Later tonight, Donald Trump Jr. will be going on Sean Hannity's show to explain his side of things.
Honestly, my takeaway when all of this was going on is that someone has information on our opponent. You know, things are going a million miles an hour. You know what it's like to be on a campaign. We just won Indiana, but we're talking about a contested convention. Things are going a million miles an hour again. And, hey, wait a minute. I've heard about all these things, but maybe this is something. I should hear him out.
Did you tell your father anything about this?
No. It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell. I mean, I wouldn't have even remembered it until you start scouring through the stuff. It was literally just a wasted 20 minutes, which was a shame.
Now, that full interview airs just ahead at 10, and you can decide for yourself what you think. But before then, consider what we know now, what Donald Trump Jr. did. A publicist emailed him to say his client had damaging information about a political opponent. Trump met with the client. Apparently, he learned nothing during that meeting. For that, he's an enemy of the state guilty of a capital crime. Now, if that is true, we've reached a new level of hysteria that could be dangerous to an awful lot of people, and not just the Trump family. How many lobbyists in Washington routinely meet with foreign agents who are seeking to influence American policy? Well, most of them, probably. It's going on right now as we speak in dozens of restaurants in D.C., literally all over the city, because that's standard here and has been for a long time. And yet, by these new standards, all of those people are now facing the possibility of lethal injection. They ought to be worried about that. But here's the most interesting thing about today's story. What was the damaging information this publicist offered Don Trump Jr. about Hillary Clinton? Well, according to the email we saw today, it was, we're quoting, official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia. In an interview today, the Russian lawyer in question says the only question she got from Donald Trump Jr. during that meeting was whether the DNC had received illegal funding from Russia. So in other words, the Trump people believed the Hillary people were colluding with Russia. Meanwhile, of course, the Hillary people thought the Trump people were doing the same thing. So each side believed the other was in bed with Vladimir Putin. It's like a comedy sketch. It would be funny, actually, if Democrats weren't suddenly talking about death penalty offenses. Britt Hume has been in Washington a long time. That's why he's Fox's senior political analyst, and he joins us now for some perspective. Is this a death penalty offense, do you think?
Oh, I think not, but I do think it does certainly suggest a willingness on the part of some of those associated with Trump, particularly his younger son, to collude with Russia if someone from Russia had information from the Russian government, as the email suggested, that would be damaging to Hillary Clinton.
Is receiving information the same as colluding?
Well, it could be so construed, but the point is the problem with the whole scenario about collusion being suggested by this is that apparently no information was exchanged, no information was obtained. So if you even were to take the negative interpretation to say this showed a willingness to collude, the collusion didn't occur, at least so far as we know. Now, if it later turns out down the road that out of this meeting, unbeknownst to or at least things turn out that we haven't heard about that suggest that something did come of it and that information was provided and it was provided courtesy of the Kremlin, that would be a different matter entirely. But so far, we don't have that. What we have so far is a meeting that apparently went nowhere. It suggests a certain level of naivete, at least on the part of young Mr. Trump, who should have known if he gets an approach that appears to be from the Putin government, that he probably ought to be careful about taking the meeting. And wouldn't you love, Tucker, to hear what Paul the campaign manager has to say, Paul Manafort has to say about this. He was in the meeting, and the Russian lawyer described him. Jared Kushner was there too. Apparently, he got up after 7 minutes and left. Right, and Manafort is described as having sat there on his telephone the whole time and paying no attention. But nonetheless, he's been around a long time. He's been on a lot of campaigns. He would know that what might be an approach from a foreign government was something you have to be careful with, which apparently young Mr. Trump didn't realize.
What's so interesting to me, though, and as a lifelong resident of Washington, maybe you can vouch for this perception, there's a lot of foreign influence on U.S. government policy going on in Washington all the time. Everyone I know is taking money from a foreign government, it seems like. And Russia's not on the top 10 list of governments that influence our policy.
No, I think, that's not quite the issue. Obviously, the ambassadors from nations all over the world are here, as we are in their countries, for the purposes of protecting our interests and thereby affecting the policies of those governments. The Russian ambassador has been a man about town in Washington for as long as I can remember, whoever he might have been. And Sergei Kislyak, who is the one with whom some of the Trump people had some meetings, was certainly in that vein. I saw him, you may have heard me say to you, last time I was in the Senate dining room, he was having lunch in there with Dianne Feinstein, and they were discussing who knows what. I never thought twice about it, and nor would anyone else. So contacts are one thing, and they're not by themselves illegitimate. But when someone acting during a presidential campaign on behalf of a foreign government, seeking apparently to help one candidate against another and to influence the campaign in that direction, that is something we have to be concerned about. The thing is, it doesn't appear to have come to anything.
What's so striking, though, is the Trump campaign clearly believed, and the Russian lawyer and her publicist, Goldstone in England, were hoping the Trump campaign would believe that the Hillary campaign was colluding with Russia. It does seem like both sides thought the same thing of the other.
Yeah, that's one of the amusing ironies of this whole thing, that each side thought the other was guilty of playing patty cake with Russian interests.
Is there an investigation into whether or not the Hillary people were indeed colluding with the Russian government?
Well, who knows?
Good
because
point.
what such investigations as are going on inside the Justice Department, headed by Mr. Mueller, are going whatever direction he chooses to take them. We have no evidence so far that any alleged Hillary Clinton campaign collusion with the Russians is a piece of it, but who knows?
You know, it'd be so fun, since we're on this topic, in this vein, and we're all on the lookout for agent provocateurs from foreign countries, is to kind of get forensic about what American policies are influenced by foreign governments, what kind of money changes hands in Washington, how many people are lobbying on behalf of foreign interests, registered or not, legally or not. There's a lot of that.
Well, there is. And look, I'm one of the people in this town who have come to take a somewhat contrarian view about lobbying. Lobbyists are universally denounced by everybody.
Yes.
Lobbying is a constitutionally protected practice. It is seeking redress of grievances, right?
Yes.
Petition for the government for redress of grievances. And if we didn't have a government that reached into every corner of American life and every nook and cranny of people's lives, we wouldn't have the squads of lobbyists that we have in this town. In a lot of cases, what lobbyists are here for is self-defense. In a lot of cases, what lobbyists are here for is to protect government subsidies that may be coming or other benefits that may be flowing to the entities that they represent. But it is a perfectly natural, constitutionally protected practice. And very often, when Congress is in one of its fits, it is the lobbyists who know the territory and know how things are going to play out who save the day by warning them, if you go there, this is what's going to happen. So let's hear it for lobbyists, and to some extent, let's hear it for ambassadors.
That is a contrarian view. Brilliant, thank you.
You bet, Tucker.
Well, sabotaging U.S. elections and eating children aren't Russia's only foreign policy goals. They're also firmly committed to fighting ISIS, which they're doing. And now it appears possible that Russian forces may have killed the head of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. A Syrian human rights group announced today it has, quote, confirmed information pointing toward the death of Baghdadi. Whether or not it's true, it's interesting. It could be a big victory in the war on terror. So why aren't more in the U.S. more excited about it? And should we be willing to work with Russia against Islamic extremism? Ralph Peters is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, and he joins us tonight. Colonel, thanks a lot for coming on.
Hey, glad to speak with you, Tucker. And for the record,
yes,
maybe your friends take money from foreign governments. I don't, and my friends don't.
I hope they don't. It's appalling how much of that happens. And it's appalling indeed how much of our policy is influenced by foreign governments. And you may see that at work now. The Saudis are dead set, of course, against Iran, and they have every reason to be. But I'm hearing a lot of people in Washington, and the Gulf states all feel the same way, a lot of people in Washington say all of a sudden, well, maybe, defeating ISIS isn't such a victory. We've all been focused on defeating the Sunni terror threat embodied by ISIS, and now as we're moving toward achieving that, all of a sudden Iran is the real problem. Why shouldn't we take a moment to celebrate the potential death of Baghdadi?
Well, indeed we should. But I would not jump to the conclusion that the Russians killed him. They actually walked back their claim that they killed him. And if you look at the timelines, the odds are pretty good that if he's dead, and let's hope he is dead, he was killed by a coalition-backed aircraft, because the Russians have not been seriously fighting ISIS. The Russians in Syria have been bombing hospitals, clinics, refugee columns, schools, and oh, by the way, they've been bombing the people we've been supporting, the anti-Assad opposition. Whereas they have been letting us take care of ISIS, and we've done a good job.
Well, Russians are certainly brutal, and so I have no trouble believing anything that you just said.
But you want an alliance with them?
I don't know why we wouldn't, it's confusing to me why, when you have a power like Russia, which obviously has interests that diverge from ours, but has some that align. Here, they've lost a lot of people to Sunni terrorism. Why wouldn't we cheer them on in their effort to stamp it out?
Well, certainly we would, but we can't have an anti-terror alliance with terrorists, which is what the Russians are. They're not Islamist terrorists, and they hate the United States of America. Again, bombing hospitals, clinics, schools. But how about, murdering dissidents and journalists at home and abroad?
Yeah, they're bad.
We have nothing in common with the Russians. Why don't
More or less than we do with the Saudis, our allies.
Well, the Saudis, I have no brook for the Saudis whatsoever.
Really, because they're our main allies in this.
They're not my main ally. And, I was warning about the Saudis decades ago, and you can read what I wrote about them. And the problem with Iran is that Iran is now, we've alienated just about everybody. We've blown it right and left in the Middle East. And now you've got Iran building an empire that'll stretch from Western Afghanistan to the Mediterranean. We've been doing a great job fighting ISIS. We've got the Iraqis, the Kurds, especially, moving in the right direction. But when ISIS is defeated, and it will be defeated and crushed, the caliphate essentially is no more. When it is, we will not be welcome, but the Iranians will be. Because we have never had a strategy, we don't have a strategy, and we won't, because we play jailbird checkers, and the Iranians and the Russians play chess.
I'm a little bit confused on a couple fronts. One, we've had over 3,000 Americans killed in this country by about a dozen acts of terror in the last 16 years. None of them committed by Shiites. None of them.
Yeah,
all of them by Sunni extremists. So we actually don't face any domestic threat from Iran. We do face a massive threat from Sunni terrorists supported by Saudi Arabia and all these countries we say are our friends. A. B, if we're so afraid of Iran, then why did we kill Saddam Hussein, thereby empowering Iran?
Because we were stupid. And Iraq...
But why are the same people who supported that stupid act, the one you just described as stupid, now agitating for a war with Iran? I'm confused.
Well, I certainly personally don't know anyone who's agitating for a war with Iran.
I do. I know a lot of people.
Okay, well, you know different people than I do. I know people that think that we have to eventually stand up to the Iranians, thanks to President Obama's outright cowardice and the shameful treatment of our sailors, for which John Kerry thanked the Iranians when they're captured. But, the Middle East is a very, very complex world. And we refused to think clearly about it and honestly about it, just as you pointed out. No Americans have been killed in the United States by Shia terrorists, Sunni terrorists. And yet, our president just went to Saudi Arabia and praised the Saudis to the skies. Our president seemed determined to do any deal he can with the Russians. And the Russians Vladimir Putin hates us. He is malevolent. And he is as close to pure evil as I can find. He's also brilliant. And so I don't understand why any American would want an alliance with Russia. We should be strengthening our alliances with democracies. Instead of trashing NATO, we should be building it up much more strongly. Why attack Australia? Why attack Canada? For God's sakes,
I think
it's about
you make a fair
Western
point.
civilization.
It's just hard to see why, and I'm not vouching for Putin's character, which he seems like a shady guy, a strong man for sure, wouldn't want to live there.
He's a killer.
Hard to see why he's a threat to us. And how many wars can we fight at once? How many people can we be in opposition to at once? Why not just accept that people who are bad people share our interests and side with them?
You sound like Charles Lindbergh in 1938 saying, Hitler hasn't attacked us.
I beg your pardon? Slow down. Hey, slow down, Colonel. I'm not in any way. You cannot compare me to someone who would make apologies for Hitler. And I don't think Putin is comparable to Hitler.
I think Putin is. Look,
I think it's a grotesque overstatement.
Putin is, well, I think
it's insane.
Putin, fine. You can think it's insane all you want.
You just compared me to a Nazi apologist because I asked a simple question, which is, slow down, why does it contravene American interests to make common cause with a group that's trying to kill ISIS?
Invaded his neighbors, broken the long peace in Europe. He assassinates dissidents and journalists. He bombs women and children on purpose in Syria. He is as bad as Hitler. And I'm sorry, if you don't like the Charles Lindbergh thing, I will retract that. But let's just say you sound like someone in the 1938 saying, "What's Hitler done to us?" Putin is
I would
the
hate to
equivalent
go
of Hitler.
back. I would hate to go back and read your columns assuring America that taking out Saddam Hussein will make the region calmer, more peaceful, and America safer, when in fact it has done exactly the opposite, and it has empowered Russia and Iran, the two countries you say you fear most. Let's just be totally honest here.
Yeah.
We don't always know the outcomes.
Right.
They're not entirely predictable. And so maybe we should lower the moral tone a little bit.
Okay, well, Pop,
Rather than calling people accommodationists and say, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen. We can only make good decisions day by day.
You made your career being an American conservative patriot, and now you're suddenly cheering for Vladimir Putin?
I'm not in any sense cheering for Vladimir Putin.
Well, you said
and it's
you
not
wanted an alliance with
it's not, I'm cheering for America as always. Our interests
Good.
ought to come first. And to the extent that making temporary alliances with other countries serve our interests, I'm in favor of that. Making sweeping moral claims, grotesque ones, comparing people to Hitler, advances the ball not 1 inch.
Vladimir
Actually, it blinds
Putin
us
is
to reality.
culpable. He hates America. He wants to hurt us. And I'm sorry, all this, suddenly Vladimir Putin's a good guy. Russia's okay. No, it's not. Russia is
So
evil.
what's your
Russia
moral
is
test?
our enemy.
Okay, so we cannot in any way do business or make common cause with a country whose leader is, quote, evil, who is, quote, a bad person. That takes most of the world off the table. Most countries are run by really bad people. That's not the question.
You're not talking about dealing with them. You're talking about an alliance, an anti-terror alliance. Come on, that's very, very different.
First step, cheering on any attacks made by Russia against our mortal enemy, our real enemy, ISIS. Why not just say that's great? I don't like Putin. I'm not living in Russia. I'm not taking money from the guy, but like a good deed is a good deed no matter who commits it. Why not just say that?
Putin isn't killing ISIS primarily. He's attacking the anti-Assad people while letting us fight ISIS.
And are you convinced, and do you speak Arabic, by the way?
No, I don't.
Oh, you don't? Okay, so.
How's your Russian?
It's non-existent.
Okay.
And I would never claim to be a Russia expert. But
Well,
I'm not
go-
sitting here
please.
talking about groups about whom I know very little, and I bet you're in
yes,
that
you are.
category, in Syria, and saying they're freedom fighters, they're serving the interest of freedom or democracy or American interest, when in fact, a lot of these groups, we know very little about them. And some of them are truly bad people who don't have our interest at
Indeed.
heart.
And we're not backing the truly bad people. And how about Assad?
Well, how do we know that?
Is Assad a good guy? Do you think?
I don't know. I mean,
if we align,
ask
if we
the Christians
align,
and Jews who lived in Syria.
If we align,
who he protected.
if we align with Russia, we are aligning with Iran. We are aligning with Assad.
And that's bad because that's bad for American interests because why?
Do you think Iran is good for American interests?
I think Iran's a bad country and in a lot of ways against American interests. But within the context of Syria, Assad was much better for America than the people I believe you hope to replace him
The
with.
Kurds? How about the Kurds?
So the Kurds are going to run Syria?
No,
now we're in fantasy land.
No, they're going to have an independent state.
You're going to break
in
up
northern
Syria
Iraq.
into lots of little countries.
Well, I'm not going to break it up. It's
Okay,
going
but
to break
that's
up
the point because it works so well in Iraq?
Yeah, well, it hasn't broken up yet. And the problem with Iraq was in 2003, when we had the chance, we didn't break it up.
We didn't break it up. Last question. Would you, knowing what you know now, and I hate to revisit this, but since you brought it up, knowing what you know now, that the deposing Saddam, his subsequent death, empowered Iran dramatically, and in fact, we explicitly helped Iran gain traction in Iraq. Do you think that was a wise idea? And do you think there are any lessons going forward in Syria that maybe when you take out a secular leader, the vacuum is filled by even worse people?
Well, I think that is a valid point you can make.
Yes,
that
it
often
is.
happens. But in 2003, we did a great thing inexcusably badly. Rumsfeld killing the MP brigades. There are a lot of reasons for it. We believed any Iraqi emigre who spoke English with an Oxford accent and wore a well-tailored suit. Again, our intentions were great, but if I had it to do over again, no, I would not get rid of Saddam Hussein because we hadn't thought it through. My mistake.
But you're confident that we've thought through what comes after Assad, who's run the country for decades, pretty peacefully, actually?
I think killing 500,000 of your own people probably doesn't mean you should remain in charge. Now,
After the civil war. I'm not making apologies for Bashar al-Assad. I'm merely saying that happened after.
It sounds like you're sitting here and making apologies for him.
So because I'm asking rational questions about what's best for America, I'm a friend to strong men and dictators. That is a conversation stopper, not a beginning of a rational conversation.
No, this is not.
My only point is that when Syria was run by Assad, 10% of the population was Christian, and they lived in relative peace, considering they lived in the middle of Levant.
That is absolutely true, and it's also true.
And so what's
that
happened to those people now?
His father killed 30,000 or more people. Well, what's happened? Now, let's be fair. Barack Obama certainly blew it right, left, and center. Through sheer trepidation, cowardice, the inability to ever make a decision. But we are where we are with 500,000 or perhaps more by now, Syrians dead. primarily killed by the Assad regime, the Iranians, Hezbollah, and now the Russians. And yet you want us to align with the Russians, with Iran, with Assad.
I want us to act in America's interest and stop making shallow, sweeping moral claims about countries we don't fully understand and then hope everything will be fine in the end, because I just saw that happen and it didn't work.
You're doing that with Russia.
I am not doing it now.
With Russia,
I'm merely saying that if a country we don't like takes active steps to kill people who are a threat to us, I'm going to pause and applaud. I'm not going to stand back and compare their leader to Hitler because it makes me feel virtuous. That's what I'm saying.
But the fault in your logic is that Assad, the Iranians, the Russians are killing the anti-Assad forces.
I'm sure, but you haven't explained why I, as an American, should be terrified by Iran or Assad. And I think American leaders should act in the interest of their own country primarily. That's the number one job they have, and they're not doing it.
You couldn't answer me on Putin, so you changed the subject to Assad. I want to know why you think Vladimir Putin's okay.
I don't think he's okay. I think it's great that he's fighting ISIS. ISIS is a threat to us, and we're being told. I'm sorry.
You want an anti-terror alliance with Russia. What does Russia tangibly bring to the table?
Bombs that kill ISIS. That's my view. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We have gone long. Colonel Peters, thank you for joining us. It was a spirited conversation. President Trump in office 6 months. The Russia story not going away. Up next, we'll talk to Scott Adams, the cartoonist.
Major League Soccer.